For 3 long years, the successor prince of the Alpha King did not speak a word. No one in the entire kingdom could calm him. The strongest warriors could not hold him back when his rage erupted. The best healers could not heal that terrifying silence. The boy who was once the hope of the entire pack, but now was only a living storm. And then, on a strange afternoon in the forgotten garden of the palace, an outcast Omega, whom no one in the pack bothered to look at, softly began to sing. And what happened after that made the entire palace, including the Alpha King, fall silent. Because for the first time in 3 years, the prince's rage stopped. No one in the palace understood why it happened. Not the healers, not the warriors, not even the Alpha King. Why was a lowly, outcast Omega the only one who could calm the storm in the prince's soul? To understand that, we must go back to the moment everything began. 3 years ago, on the night the Alpha King's palace fell into silence. Part 1. The Silent Storm. Chapter 1. The child whom no one could calm. A roar echoed throughout the palace. Not the roar of a warrior, not of a wild beast, but of a child. The training room door was slammed against the wall as a small figure rushed out of the room, eyes burning like fire. "Hold him back!" a warrior shouted. 3 large men immediately lunged forward, but they were not in time. Prince Kael turned as fast as a wind. The strength of the alpha blood made his small body more dangerous than anyone in the room. A wooden table was overturned. A warrior was thrown straight against the wall. The sound of breaking glass rang out. The servants frantically ran out of the corridor. "Back away," an old healer shouted. "He is losing control." But that warning was too late. Prince Kael stood in the middle of the ruined room, breath gasping, fingernails transformed into half-wolf claws. He said nothing, did not scream, did not cry. Only a terrifying silence. A silence that had lasted 3 years. A young warrior looked at the person standing at the door of the room. "Sir Alpha, what should we do?" That man was taller than everyone. A black cloak fell over his shoulders as broad as a wall. That was Alpha King Aldric, the ruler of the entire northern pack. But even he at this moment could not step closer. His eyes looked at his son, the only child who would succeed the throne. And in those eyes, there was something that rarely appeared in an alpha: helplessness. "Withdraw," he said softly. The warriors immediately backed away. No one wanted to anger the prince when he was in this state. Kael stood motionless in the middle of the ruined room. His golden eyes swept over everyone like a wild beast being cornered. But then, those eyes stopped at the necklace in his hand, a thin silver chain. At the end of the chain was a small crescent moon-shaped stone, the only remaining relic of the Luna. The small fingers tightened around the stone so much that the knuckles turned white. The whole room held its breath. A healer whispered, 3 years already." Another replied in a voice as soft as if afraid to break something fragile. 3 years, and he still hasn't said another word. Aldric did not answer. He only looked at his son. 3 years ago, Kael was a different child. A child who laughed a lot. A child who ran across the palace corridors. A child who called him father, with a voice full of pride. But that night, the night the Luna passed away, everything changed. Since that moment, the prince of the northern pack was no longer a child. He became a storm, a wordless storm, and no one in the entire kingdom could calm it. Chapter 2. The night when the palace sank into silence, 3 years ago. That night, the northern wind blew hard through the stone walls of the palace, carrying a cold that made the torches along the corridor shake violently. The sky was pitch black, no moon, no stars, only the sound of the wind whistling through the watchtowers. Inside the palace, the dim yellow torchlight shone on the ancient stone walls. But that night, that light did not bring a sense of warmth, only tension. Hurried footsteps echoed throughout the corridors. Healers, servants, warriors, all were running to the same place, Luna's room. At the end of the long corridor, a small boy stood quietly by the stone wall. That was Prince Kael. He was quite small at that time, but his golden eyes already carried a stern look identical to his northern Alpha King father. Behind the large wooden door, chaotic sounds rang out. "Prepare more medicine. Keep her awake. We are losing her." The urgent words of the healers made Kael's heart beat fast in his chest. He gripped the silver necklace in his hand. The crescent moon-shaped pendant faintly reflected the torchlight. That was the gift Luna gave him on his birthday last year. "You must keep it very carefully," she had told him at that time, and smiled gently, because the moon always leads the way for the wolves. A healer stepped hurriedly out of the room, carrying a tray full of red-stained towels. He froze when he saw the prince. "Your Highness, you should not be here." Kael did not answer. His gaze was still fixed on the door. Inside, the weak voice of Luna rang out. "Kael." The small boy immediately stepped forward. "Mother," but the door remained closed. The healers inside immediately said something with tense voices. A servant ran across the corridor. "Where is the Alpha King?" Lord Aldric is on his way back from the border. Hearing his father's name, Kael turned his head, but the corridor was still empty. Alpha King Aldric had still not returned. He turned back to look at the door. Small hands pressed against the cold wood. "Mother." That was the last time Kael called that word. Inside the room, suddenly there was the sound of objects falling. A healer screamed, "No, keep her awake." Then another voice, full of despair, "We are about to lose her." Kael's heart seemed to stop beating. Then, everything suddenly became silent. No more human voices, no more footsteps, only the sound of the wind blowing through the long corridor. The door opened. A healer stepped out. His face was pale. He saw the prince and stopped. His gaze dropped. Kael did not need to hear any words. He understood. His fingers tightened around the silver necklace. The small metal moon cut into his palm. A single tear fell on the cold stone floor. But he did not cry, did not scream, did not speak, just stood there. And from that night, Alpha King Aldric's palace sank into a terrifying silence, and Prince Kael never spoke another word again. Chapter 3. The Outcast Omega. The wooden carriage stopped in front of the back gate of the palace. It was not the grand gate where warriors entered and exited, not the gate meant for nobles. It was a narrow gate, hidden behind high stone walls, where servants and laborers entered every day. The wheels creaked as they came to a halt. A soldier opened the carriage door and ordered, "Get out." 3 women stepped down first. They were new servants brought to the palace. The last person stepped down more slowly. A young girl with long brown hair, simply tied behind her back. She was Elira. Elira stood still for a moment as her feet touched the cold ground. In front of her, the palace of Alpha King Aldric rose up commandingly. The stone walls were so high they almost covered the sky. The watchtowers stood upright like giant spears. This was the most powerful place of the northern pack, and it was also the place where the weak like her should never set foot. A servant standing nearby glanced at her from head to toe. "Is she the new one?" Another person snorted. "I heard she is an Omega kicked out by her pack." Elira lowered her head. She was used to words like that. Since she was a child, everyone in the pack had known one thing about her. Elira had no wolf, an Omega born without being able to hear her own wolf's voice. In the werewolf world, that was almost a curse. "Then why is she still alive?" Another servant said quietly, not hiding her contempt at all. The soldier led them inside. "Enough. Follow me." They stepped through the back gate, entering the area reserved for servants. There were no grand hallways, no red carpets, only narrow stone paths and cold walls. An elderly woman was waiting there, the housekeeper of the servants' quarters. She looked at each person one by one with an evaluating gaze. "You," she pointed at the first 2. "The kitchen." The 2 girls hurriedly bowed their heads. "And you," she turned to the 3rd person, "the laundry room." Finally, her gaze stopped at Elira. She looked at her a bit longer. "You are the Omega with no wolf." That was not a question, just a cold confirmation. Elira nodded slightly. "Yes." The housekeeper let out a soft breath. "Then you do not need to be in the main palace." She turned to another servant. "Take her to the back garden. They are short of people to care for the plants there." A young servant nodded. "Follow me." Elira followed silently. They went through a long stone path, gradually moving away from the crowded area. The palace behind them became more distant. The sound of people talking also gradually disappeared. Finally, they stopped in front of a wide garden. But unlike the gardens in fairy tales, this place seemed to have been forgotten for a long time. The stone statues were cracked and broken. Grass grew high between the pathways. Dry tree branches hung down like tired arms. The servant pointed at a bucket and a set of gardening tools. "Your job is to take care of this garden again." Elira nodded. The servant looked around for a bit, then added, "Few people come here, so just do your work." After that, she turned and left. The iron gate behind closed with a light clank. The garden returned to its previous silence. Elira stood alone among the old stone statues. A light breeze blew through the trees. She leaned down to pick up the bucket. Starting to work, she pulled weeds from the paths, watered the withered flower bushes, picked up broken branches fallen on the ground. No one looked at her. No one spoke to her, but Elira did not complain. She was used to loneliness. A moment later, when the work was temporarily done, she sat down by an old stone statue. The afternoon sunlight pierced through the trees. The space was so quiet that she could hear the birds far away. Elira breathed out softly. Then, almost out of habit, she began to sing. A gentle melody, slow, as tender as moonlight on a lake. That was the song her mother used to sing when she was a child. Music can heal broken hearts, her mother once said, even when they do not know they are being hurt. Elira sang softly, almost only for herself to hear. The melody drifted lightly in the air of the wild garden. She did not know that, on the other side of the garden, among the broken stone statues, a small figure was standing motionless, a boy with golden eyes glowing in the shade. That was Prince Kael. For the past 3 years, he had never reacted to any sound in the palace, not to words, not to crying, not to his father's calls. But at this moment, his head tilted up slightly. His golden eyes looked toward the girl who was singing as if he were trying to remember something that had been forgotten. Elira continued to sing. She did not know that in this garden, a storm was beginning to settle. And for the first time in 3 years, Prince Kael was listening intently. Chapter 4. The Prince's Wild Garden. Behind the palace of Alpha King Aldric, there was a garden that no one mentioned on any maps. Not because it was too small, but because no one wanted to enter. The stone path leading there had cracked long ago. Clumps of weeds grew ankle-high, pushing through every crevice in the stones. The ancient stone statues, once carved in the likeness of the great alphas of the north, were now nothing more than broken figures covered in moss. An old iron gate stood at the entrance. It was not locked, but people rarely dared to open it, because in the palace, everyone knew one thing. That garden belonged to the prince. No one said it out loud, but the servants passed it to one another in whispers. If you see the prince there, turn back. If you hear his voice there, leave. And if he is in a rage, it is best not to be near. That afternoon, the wild garden was quieter than usual. A light breeze blew through the old trees. The late-day sunlight fell upon the cracked stone statues. On the stone pedestal of a headless statue, a boy was sitting. That was Prince Kael. He sat very straight, his legs dangling over the edge of the stone, his small hands placed on his knees. His black hair was a bit long, blown lightly across his forehead by the wind. Under the afternoon sun, his golden eyes glowed like metallic light. Those were the eyes of an alpha, but the look in those eyes was not like other children. There was no curiosity, no joy, only a deep stillness. Kael did not speak. He had not spoken for 3 years. No one knew exactly what had happened in his mind after the night Luna passed away. The healers once said it was a form of mental shock. The warriors said he was just rebelling. But Alpha King Aldric knew the truth was much simpler. His son had lost a part of his heart. The wind blew through the garden. Dry leaves rolled lightly on the stone ground. Kael did not look at them. His gaze directed far away, toward a tall stone tower of the palace. The window on the upper floor of that tower, where Luna's room was. He looked in that direction every day, always at the same spot, at the same statue, with the same look, as if he were waiting for something, or someone. Kael's small fingers moved slightly. He took a silver necklace out of his pocket. The crescent moon-shaped pendant flickered slightly under the sun. That was the last gift Luna gave him. Kael slowly turned the pendant between his fingers. That action had become a habit, something he did almost every day. In this garden, on this statue, looking toward that window, a servant once accidentally saw this scene from afar. She whispered to others later. The prince sits there, like a shadow. And it truly was so. Kael rarely left the wild garden once the anger inside him settled. Here there were no servants, no warriors, no fearful eyes, only the wind, the trees, and the statues forgotten by time. Kael lowered his head a bit, his gaze stopping on the necklace. His fingers tightened slightly. One moment passed, then another. The silence in the garden was so deep that one could hear the sound of bird wings very far away. Then the wind changed direction. A gentle breeze blew through the garden carrying a very faint sound. A melody. Not loud, not clear. Just a few musical notes drifting in the air. Kael raised his head, very slowly. His golden eyes moved slightly. That melody continued, gentle, soothing, like moonlight falling on a still lake. Kael did not speak, but for the first time in a long time, he did not look toward Luna's window. His gaze turned toward the other side of the garden, where the broken stone statues hid a small path. That melody came from somewhere behind the trees. Kael stood up, slowly, the silver necklace still in his hand. The wind blew through the garden again, carrying that melody once more. And for the first time in 3 years, Prince Kael stepped down from the stone statue where he sat every day. Chapter 5. The song that made the storm stop. The melody was still ringing out, so light it was almost just a breath in the wind. Prince Kael walked slowly through the wild garden. The broken stone statues stood silently around him like ghosts of the past. Weeds brushed against his ankles as he passed, but Kael did not seem to feel it. He only heard the song, a gentle melody, drifting through the air like moonlight falling on a lake but intensely pulling him toward the source of that sound. Kael stopped behind a statue broken in half. In front of him, a few steps away, was a maid. Elira was kneeling by a flower bush, holding small shears to cut the dry branches. Her brown hair fell lightly on her shoulders as she leaned down. She did not know someone was behind her, and she continued to hum. The sound of the song spread through the empty garden. There were no warriors, no servants, no fearful eyes, only the wind and that soft melody. Kael stood motionless. For the past 3 years, the palace of Alpha King Aldric was always full of sounds. The sound of metal clashing in the training yard, the sound of healers calling his name, the sound of warriors trying to hold him back when his rage erupted. But all those sounds did not touch him. They passed over his head like wind over stone. But this song was different. A strange feeling rose in Kael's chest. Not clear, just something very distant but also very familiar. His fingers tightened around the silver necklace, the crescent moon pendant freezing cold in his palm. And then a few images flashed in his mind. The gentle light of an oil lamp, a warm room, a very familiar voice. Mother. That word burst from his lips before he could realize it. The sound was hoarse and small, almost disappearing immediately in the wind. But as soon as that memory touched Kael's mind, pain flared up, like an invisible claw tightening around his head. Kael doubled over, his breath becoming ragged. A low roar rose from his throat. The rage came as fast as a storm. Kael's body trembled. His bones creaked as the alpha power surged. Sharp claws pushed out from his fingertips. His golden eyes blazed, reflecting the afternoon sun like fire. In that moment, Kael no longer looked like a 9-year-old boy. He looked like a wounded small wolf, angry, wild, and desperate. A nearby stone statue shattered as his claws swept across it. The sound of breaking stone rang through the garden. Elira startled and turned around. She saw Kael standing in the middle of the garden, his breath heavy. His body was in a half-human, half-wolf state, sharp claws, blazing golden eyes. Elira immediately recognized it was Prince Kael from the rumors. And in that situation, any servant in the palace knew what it meant. Run. Immediately. But Elira did not run, not because she was brave, only because she had never seen the prince in this state, and in that brief moment, what she saw was not a beast, but a child in pain. The rage in Kael surged again. He gripped the necklace. The pain in his head flared up again, more intense, as if every time he tried to touch the memory of Luna, an invisible hand pulled him down into the abyss. A roar escaped Kael's throat. Elira breathed in softly. Then by instinct, she continued to sing. The melody did not change at all. Not faster, not trembling, just light and gentle. The sound of the song drifted through the garden, like a stream of water flowing over stone. Kael stood motionless, the rage in his eyes still burned. But that melody touched somewhere very deep inside him, a memory, a feeling reminiscent of an evening long ago. A flash of warmth flickered through his chest. Kael's fingers trembled, the pain in his head slowed down. It did not disappear, but it grew weaker. The song continued. Elira still did not step closer. She still stood there and sang. Her gaze did not leave the prince. No fear, no panic, only a strange gentleness. Kael blinked, his claws trembled. Then, very slowly, they retracted. His breathing slowed down. The rage gradually calmed. It no longer swallowed him like a few minutes before. Kael looked down at the necklace in his hand. His finger lightly touched the silver moon. Elira's song continued to drift through the air. One note, then another, and then Kael's finger moved slightly, very slightly, tapping on the pendant. One beat, then another beat. Right with the melody of the song. Elira did not realize it. She only continued to sing. But in the wild garden of Alpha King Aldric's palace, something that had never happened in the past 3 years just happened. the storm in the soul of Prince Kael settled. Chapter 6. The Alpha King's Command. News spread faster than the wind throughout Alpha King Aldric's palace. It was not through official proclamations, but through whispers. Servants spoke to one another in the corridors. Warriors exchanged glances as they passed the back garden. And in just one afternoon, almost the entire palace had heard the same story. Prince Kael did not succumb to his rage. Not when he was in the garden. Not when he was near the newly arrived Omega. One servant recounted in a trembling voice, "I saw it with my own eyes. The prince stood right in front of her." Another whispered, "She did not run away." "No." "And the prince did not attack." The first servant shook their head. "No." The kitchen fell silent for a few seconds. Then someone else spoke even softer. "Who is she?" No one knew the answer. But those whispers finally reached the ears of the only person who could not ignore them, Alpha King Aldric. His office was located on the highest floor of the northern tower. A spacious room with cold stone walls and large windows overlooking the entire territory. On the dark wood desk, strategic maps were spread out, but Aldric did not look at them. He was listening to a report. A warrior stood before him, back straight, voice serious. "Alpha King," that is what the servants saw. Aldric was silent. The light from the window shone on his angular face. The Alpha King's gray eyes were deep and cold like a winter sky. "You are telling me," Aldric finally spoke, his voice low and deep, that a newly arrived Omega could stand before the prince while he was in a rage. "Yes, Alpha. And he did not attack." "No." The room was silent. Aldric rose from his chair. His height made the room seem smaller as he stepped to the window. Outside, the northern forest stretched to the horizon, an Alpha who had fought half his life to protect that land, an Alpha who had never feared any enemy. But there was one thing in the past 3 years he could not control. That was his son. Aldric closed his eyes for a brief second. Kael's image appeared in his mind, the child who used to run through the palace corridors, the child who used to laugh when Luna picked him up, and then the child standing in the middle of the training room, claws stained with blood, golden eyes full of rage. 3 years. For 3 years Aldric had tried every way, from healers, mages, even old alphas from other packs. No one could calm the storm in Kael. Yet now, an unknown Omega had done it. Aldric turned back. "What is her name?" "Alpha, Elira. Origin, no fixed pack, a wolfless Omega." Aldric's eyes narrowed. A child with no wolf, the weakest person in their society, someone who should have stayed furthest from the prince. Yet, Kael was calm near her. There were 2 possibilities. Either it was a miracle, or it was a danger. In the world of packs, Aldric had learned a lesson very early on. Nothing happens without a reason, and when something is too unusual, an alpha must find the reason before it becomes a threat. Aldric stepped back to the desk and gave a command. The warrior immediately stood straighter. "Yes, Alpha. Do not let that Omega near the prince." The warrior hesitated for a second. "Alpha, if the prince—" "I have made myself clear." Aldric's voice was not loud, but the weight in it made no one dare to object. "Yes, Alpha King." Aldric looked out the window once more, the northern wind blowing through the stone towers of the palace. Far away, the wild garden lay quietly behind the walls. He did not believe in miracles, not in war, not in politics, and certainly not in his palace. If Elira could calm Kael, then Aldric must know why. "Investigate her," he added. "Past, family, former pack. I want to know everything." The warrior bowed, understood. The door closed as he left. The room became quiet again. Aldric stood alone, his eyes still directed toward the garden behind the palace. An uncomfortable premonition rose in his chest. Not fear, but the feeling of an alpha standing before something not yet understood. A wolfless Omega, an ancient song, and his prince was calm for the first time in 3 years. Aldric tightened his hand. "I will know the truth," he said softly. But in the garden behind the palace, Elira still did not know that after only a short afternoon, she had become the focus of the Alpha King, and his command was about to change everything. Chapter 7. When the Rage Returns. Alpha King Aldric's command was carried out starting the very next morning. In the palace of the Northern Pack, no one dared to delay when the Alpha gave an order, even when that order concerned the prince. Elira was watering the withered flower bushes in the wild garden when she heard the iron gate opening behind her. She turned around. 2 warriors stood at the entrance. One spoke, his voice stiff. "You are no longer allowed to work here." Elira froze. "I am sorry." "Order of the Alpha King." She was silent for a moment. Her gaze briefly looked around the garden, the broken stone statues, the paths where grass grew high, the only quiet place in the palace. But I was assigned to care for this garden. No longer. The other warrior opened the gate. You will work in the kitchen area from today. Elira bowed her head. Yes. She asked nothing more, only followed them out of the garden. The iron gate closed behind with a small clank. The wild garden returned to its familiar silence. But that silence did not last long. That afternoon, a roar erupted from the training yard. The roar was so deep and raw that the warriors immediately stopped their hands. A sword fell onto the stone floor. The prince, a warrior, spoke softly. Kael stood in the middle of the training yard, his golden eyes burning bright. The rage had returned, but this time, it was more intense than before. Kael's breath was heavy. His body trembled as the alpha blood surged. His shoulder bones protruded under his clothes. Claws burst out from his fingertips. In just a few seconds, he had fallen into a half-human, half-wolf state, a form that made even the most seasoned warriors back away. But the most terrifying thing was not the claws. It was the gaze. In those eyes, there was not only anger, there was also a pain so deep it was almost desperate. Kael turned his head to look around the training yard, his gaze sweeping over every face, as if searching for something, or someone. But that person was not here. A roar escaped his throat. Kael lunged forward. A wooden post in the training yard snapped in half under his strike, wood splinters flying everywhere. The warriors retreated. No one dared to get too close. No one. On the stone stands above, Alpha King Aldric stood watching. He did not speak, did not give orders, only watched. For 3 years, Aldric had seen this scene too many times. Kael's rage came like a storm. No warning, no rules. But today, he realized something different. Kael was not just destroying everything, he was searching. The prince's gaze continuously swept around the training yard, as if he were expecting someone to appear. But no one came. The rage in Kael flared up again. He gripped the silver necklace in his hand, the small metal moon cutting into his skin. A memory flashed in his head. A soft light, a singing voice. Mother. But that sound was held tight deep in his throat, no way to burst from his lips. As soon as the memory touched, pain exploded. Kael doubled over. A painful roar rang out. The rage swirled more violently. He clenched his hand. Aldric saw that moment. The moment Kael almost remembered something, then was pulled back into the rage again. For 3 years, this had happened many times, but he still did not understand why. Right then, a voice rang out at the entrance of the training yard. I am sorry. I did not know this place was being used. A few warriors turned their heads. Elira stood at the entrance. She held a small basket of herbs. Perhaps she was just passing by from the kitchen. A warrior immediately stepped forward. You are not allowed to be here. But it was too late. Kael had seen her, had heard her sound. The rage still burned in his golden eyes. But that look no longer swept past everyone. It stopped at Elira. The entire training yard seemed to hold its breath. Elira also saw the prince. Claws, blazing golden eyes, a fury that could explode at any moment. But what made her stand still was the lingering pain deep in his gaze. Not a beast, but a child trapped in his own storm. Elira breathed in softly. Then as an instinct she began to sing. The melody drifted gently across the training yard. Amidst the sound of wind and broken wood splinters, that sound almost did not belong to this place. The warriors looked at each other. A healer whispered, What is she doing? Kael stood motionless, the rage in his eyes still burned. But that melody, he remembered it. Kael's fingers trembled, the pain in his head slowed down. The song continued, one note, then another note. Kael's claws trembled. Then very slowly, they retracted. His breathing grew slow and steady. The rage seemed to be calming down. Elira's song still continued, and Kael's finger moved slightly, tapping on the pendant. One beat, then another beat. Right with the melody, the entire training yard was silent. A warrior let out a very soft breath. The healer beside him almost could not believe his eyes. On the stone stands, Aldric still stood motionless. His gray eyes looked from his son to the singing Omega. A wolfless Omega, someone who should not be able to do this. But Kael was calming down, for the second time. In the distance of the training yard, a figure stood in the stone corridor. A woman wearing a Luna cloak. Cold eyes observed the scene. She was Vera, the new Luna of the Northern Pack, saying nothing, but her gaze stopped for a long time on Elira. then slowly narrowed. On the stands, Aldric tightened his hand. If that girl could calm the storm in Kael, then he must know the reason. At all costs. Chapter 8. The only one the prince searches for. The training yard gradually returned to silence. Broken pieces of wood still lay scattered on the stone ground. The warriors stood a safe distance from the prince, no one daring to approach. Prince Kael still sat in the middle of the yard. The silver necklace was still in his hand. His small fingers instinctively touched the metal moon, as if still feeling the melody that had just passed through this place. Elira had left. She did not know she had just become the center of the entire training yard. A warrior stepped close to Aldric, speaking softly. "Alpha King, should we take the prince back to his room?" Aldric did not answer immediately. He still looked at Kael, observing the rage that had receded. Not completely, but enough so that Kael was no longer dangerous. This was the second time, twice within 2 days, and both times, that girl was there. Aldric turned away. "Leave him be." The warrior nodded, understood. But when they turned back to look at the training yard, Kael had stood up. The warriors immediately tensed their bodies, but the prince did not lunge at them, did not destroy anything further. He only looked around. His golden eyes slowly swept across the training yard, then stopped at the exit, where Elira had just left. A warrior whispered to the person beside him, "He is searching for her." The other did not answer, but his gaze also followed that direction. Kael took a step, then another. A warrior unconsciously blocked the path. "Your Highness." Kael stopped, not looking at the warrior, just standing still. A strange silence enveloped them. Then Kael tilted his head slightly as if listening. The wind blew through the training yard, carrying sounds from the far side of the palace. The sound of people talking, the sound of pots and pans in the kitchen. But there was no melody, no song. Kael's fingers tightened around the necklace. A flash of confusion appeared in his gaze. Then, a low roar escaped his throat. Not rage, just an uneasy sound. A warrior said quietly, "He is starting again." But Kael did not succumb to rage. He only turned his head to look around again as if still searching. On the other side of the palace, Elira was working in the kitchen area. She stood by a long wooden table, cutting herb leaves. The scent of mint and rosemary mixed in the air. A servant talked to her. "What pack do you come from?" Elira shook her head lightly. "I have no pack." The other frowned. "None. I had one before, but they did not need me anymore." The servant did not ask further, only made a soft "oh" sound. Elira leaned down to continue the work, but in her head there was still the image of the prince and his golden eyes full of pain, and the moment he sat down, like a tired child. She did not know why seeing that scene made her so sad. Something pricked at her heart, like an urge, like a prompt for her to sing, and she also did not understand why her song had such an effect. She only knew one thing. That boy was very lonely. Back at the training yard, Kael still stood at the exit. A warrior finally said, "Your Highness, you should." Kael suddenly turned his head, his gaze stopping at the corridor leading to the kitchen area. No one knew why, but he began to walk toward that direction. The warriors looked at each other. "Should we stop him?" one asked. From the stands above, Aldric's voice rang down. "No, just one word." The warriors immediately stood still. Kael walked through the long stone corridor, small footsteps echoing on the cold stone floor. He did not know where he was going, only knew that the melody had disappeared and he wanted to find it again. In the kitchen, Elira placed the bundle of herbs on the table. A servant was telling a story somewhere in the back. She almost did not hear. Suddenly, the entire room fell silent. Elira raised her head. Every eye was directed toward the door. Prince Kael was standing there. No rage, no claws, just a boy with deep and quiet eyes. The entire kitchen held its breath. A servant whispered, "The prince!" Kael did not look at them. His gaze only stopped at Elira, as if the other people in the room did not exist. Elira stood still. She did not know if she should bow or run away. But Kael did not come closer. He only stood there and waited. His fingers again lightly touched the necklace as a habit. Then, softly tapped one beat, like he was waiting to hear the next melody. Elira understood. She breathed in softly and began to sing. The gentle melody spread throughout the kitchen. The servants looked at each other, not daring to breathe hard. Kael stood still, his gaze gradually softening. The tension in his body slowly melted away completely. His fingers continued to tap the beat on the pendant, right with the song. At the far corridor door, Alpha King Aldric stood still, observing everything. He did not enter, only looked at his prince and that Omega. Something very unusual was happening. And Aldric knew from this moment onward, everything in his palace would no longer be the same as before. Chapter 9. The Scent the Wolf Cannot Deny. After the incidents in the training yard and the kitchen, Alpha King Aldric no longer viewed Elira as a coincidence. And Alpha does not believe in coincidences, especially when it concerns his son. The next morning, Aldric went down to the western kitchen of the palace himself. No guards, no announcement. His appearance caused the entire kitchen to fall silent immediately. The servants bowed their heads. Alpha King. Aldric nodded slightly, but his eyes did not look at them. He was looking for one person, Elira. She stood at the last table, trimming herb leaves. Her brown hair was tied neatly behind her back. The morning light shone through the window, falling gently on her shoulders. A servant beside her was asking, "Are you really not afraid of the prince?" Elira paused her hands for a moment. "I am." The answer surprised the other. "Then why did you still stand there yesterday?" Elira thought for a second, then said softly, "Because he needed someone to stay." The whole kitchen went silent. Aldric heard every word clearly. He stepped inside, and the servants immediately parted to both sides. Elira also realized the change in the air. She turned and immediately bowed her head. "Alpha." Aldric stopped in front of her workbench. He said nothing, only watched. Elira felt that gaze, heavy, sharp, piercing into her as if he were searching for something within her. "You met the prince in the garden." Aldric's voice was low and deep. It was not a question, just a confirmation. Elira nodded. "Yes." "And you sang?" "Yes." "Why?" Elira thought. I think he was trying to remember something. Aldric frowned slightly. "Are you a healer?" "No." "A mage?" "No." "Then why do you think you can help the prince?" Elira raised her head for the first time. Her gaze was not challenging at all, only very calm. "I do not think I can help, but my mother's song always helped wolves in pain." The answer was simple, without calculation, without fear. Aldric looked at her for a longer time. Then, a light breeze blew through the window. It carried Elira's scent, very light, very delicate. Not the scent of flowers, not the scent of an omega, but something cold and soothing, like moonlight falling on snow. Immediately, the wolf inside Aldric moved. An instinctive reaction, very strong, very clear, unmistakable. "Mate," that word echoed clearly in his head. Aldric froze. For a brief moment, everything in the kitchen seemed to go silent. He looked at Elira, a wolfless omega, a servant, not a Luna, not an alpha, not someone who could stand beside him. Impossible. Aldric took a step back, trying to push that feeling down. His gaze turned cold. "You will continue to work here." Elira nodded. "Yes." Aldric turned his back. He walked quickly out of the kitchen. The corridor light shone on his black cloak, but even when he had left the room, that scent remained in the air. The wolf inside him was not yet silent. Aldric stopped, clenching his hand, then said softly, almost like an affirmation to himself, "A weak omega," he paused for a beat, "cannot be my mate." But deep in his instincts, the wolf had already decided. Chapter 10. The Secret of the Song. Strange stories always spread quickly in the palace, faster than news of war, faster than an alpha's command. In just 2 days, almost every servant in the northern pack knew one thing. Prince Kael was calm when he heard Elira sing, not once, but twice, in the training yard and even in the kitchen. A servant whispered while washing dishes, "I have never seen the prince like that." The other nodded. "I have not either." He just stood there, listening to her sing, like a child. They did not know that another person was also listening to that story. In the corner of the kitchen, an old man was sitting, his back slightly hunched, his long silver hair tied behind his neck. He was the oldest healer in the palace. His name was Theron. Theron had lived in this palace longer than most people here. He had served Aldric's father, and before that, even the Luna. Theron said nothing when he heard the whispers. He only quietly drank his tea, but his gaze remained on Elira. She was standing at the long table, arranging bundles of herbs. A young servant turned to her. "Where did you learn that song?" Elira raised her head. "Which song?" "The one you sang for the prince." Elira thought for a moment. "Ah." She smiled faintly. "My mother taught me." The other servant shrugged. "It sounds strange." Elira leaned down to continue the work. "Perhaps so." Theron placed the teacup down. The sound was very small, but enough to make Elira look toward him. The old man stood up slowly. walking close to her table. "Elira." His voice was hoarse but warm. Elira immediately bowed her head. "Healer." Theron looked at her for a bit longer. His eyes aged but sharp. "I heard you sang for the prince." Elira was a bit flustered. "It was just a song. Can you sing it for me again?" A few servants nearby curiously turned their heads. Elira hesitated for a moment, but then she nodded. "All right." She took a light breath, then began to sing. The familiar melody drifted through the kitchen, gentle, slow, as tender as moonlight falling on a lake. At just the first few notes, Theron stood frozen. His eyes widened, not because of surprise, but because of recognition. Elira finished the first part of the song, then stopped. She looked at him. "Is something not right?" Theron did not answer immediately. He was looking at her as if he were seeing something from very long ago. A memory, an era. Finally, he asked softly, "Who taught you this song?" Elira repeated, "My mother." "What was her name?" "Leora." That name made Theron freeze. He closed his eyes for a brief second, then opened them. "I have heard this song before." Elira was a bit surprised, really. Theron nodded. "A very long time ago. In this palace," a servant asked. "Is there something special about that song?" Theron looked at them, then said slowly, "That is not an ordinary song." The kitchen went silent. "That is the moon song." Elira frowned. "Moon song." Theron nodded. "The ancient song of the Lunas." A servant laughed lightly. "You mean it is the song of a Luna?" Theron looked at her. His gaze made the laughter immediately die out. "Not an ordinary Luna," he said, "but an ancient Luna." The kitchen was completely silent. Theron turned back to look at Elira. In the past, there were Lunas who could soothe wolves with their singing voice. A correct melody could make an alpha in a rage become calm. A servant whispered, "Just like the prince." Theron nodded. "Correct." His gaze became deeper. The Luna of Alpha King Aldric also knew this song. Elira stopped for a moment. "The prince's mother." "Yes." Theron looked at her. "For a long time, but I thought the moon singer bloodline had disappeared," he said softly. "After the death of the Luna." Elira stood still. She had never heard that word before. Moon singer. Theron asked further, "When did your mother teach you this song?" "When I was small." "Did she say why?" Elira shook her head. She only said, "She remembered that this song is for wolves who are lost." Theron looked at her. A strange feeling rose in his heart. If this song is the moon song, if the prince reacts to it, and if Elira knows how to sing it, then only one question remains, he said softly as if talking to himself. "Why?" His gaze stopped on the young girl, an outcast Omega who knew the song of the Luna. Chapter 11. The first word after 3 years. News of Elira's song did not stop at the kitchen. It spread through the stone corridors, across the training grounds, even to the guards at the northern gate. Everyone spoke of the same thing. Prince Kael was calm when he heard her sing. Twice. No one understood why, but everyone knew one thing. This palace was no longer as quiet as it had been for the past 3 years. That afternoon, the northern sky was covered in gray clouds, a cold wind blowing through the garden behind the palace. Elira stood by the small water well, washing bundles of freshly picked herbs. She had been moved to work near the back garden. No one explained the reason, but she could guess. Perhaps the Alpha King wanted to keep her near where the prince often appeared. Elira dipped her hands into the water, the coldness making her shiver slightly, but her mind was thinking of something else. The quiet but mournful eyes of the prince, always carrying pain in that gaze. She did not know why she remembered it so much. She only knew that her intuition told her that boy was very lonely. The sound of a footstep rang out behind her, very light. Elira turned around. Prince Kael was standing at the entrance of the garden. Only him. The wind blew through the prince's black hair. His golden eyes looked straight at her. Elira bowed her head slightly. "Your Highness." Kael did not answer. He only stood there as if waiting for something. Elira looked around. There was no one else. Only the wind and the trees. She understood. He wanted to hear the song. Elira took a light breath and began to sing. The melody of the moon song drifted through the garden, light as moonlight, slow as a breath. Kael stood still, his gaze softening completely. His fingers again instinctively sought the silver necklace, and then softly tapped the beat. One beat, then another, exactly like the last time. Elira continued to sing, but this time, something was different. When the melody reached a high note, Kael suddenly closed his eyes. Shattered fragments of memory flashed in his head again. The oil lamp, a warm room, a woman with bright hair, a singing voice exactly like this melody. Mother. As soon as that memory touched, the familiar pain immediately flared up, like a claw tightening around his mind. Kael trembled. Elira immediately stopped singing. Your Highness. Kael opened his eyes, the rage trying to surge. But this time, it was not as strong as before, because the song still echoed in his head. Elira took a step back. She thought she should leave. She did not want to trigger his rage. She turned her back, intending to walk away. And at that moment, a small hand gripped her wrist. Elira startled and turned around. Kael was looking at her. For the first time, she saw those quiet golden eyes tremble slightly. He opened his mouth as if trying to say something, but the sound did not escape. 3 years of silence had made speaking something foreign. Elira did not move. She waited. Kael gripped the necklace tight. Another memory flashed. That night, blood on the stone floor. A cold voice. The pain in his head flared up again, but this time, he still tried to speak. His lips trembled and then a hoarse sound escaped. Don't. Elira's eyes widened. Kael gripped her hand tighter. Don't go. 2 words. Small and hoarse but clear. The entire garden seemed to stop breathing. For 3 years the prince had not spoken a word. And now, those were the first words. Elira stood frozen. She did not know what she should say. She only knew that her heart was beating very fast. Kael still held her hand as if afraid that if he let go, she would disappear. At the far side of the garden, on the stone balcony of the palace, Alpha King Aldric was standing. He had seen everything. Seen Kael holding Elira's hand, seen his lips moving, and seen those 2 words, don't go. Aldric tightened his hand. For the past 3 years, he had waited for one thing, only one thing, to hear his son speak again. And now, that happened. But not because of a healer or a mage, but because of an outcast Omega. At the back of the stone corridor, another person had also heard. Vera. She stood tucked in the shadows, her cold eyes looking down at the garden. The prince had spoken after 3 years, and she knew what that meant. If Kael's memories began to return, then the secret of 3 years ago would no longer be buried for much longer. Chapter 12. Buried Memories. After Prince Kael spoke his first 2 words in 3 years, the palace of the Northern Pack was no longer the same. The news spread in silence. No one dared to speak loudly, but everyone knew. The prince had said, don't go. 2 small words, but to those who had witnessed Kael's 3 years of silence, it was like thunder echoing in the middle of winter. That evening, the garden behind the palace was bathed in pale moonlight. Kael sat on his familiar old stone pedestal. The silver necklace was still in his hand. His small fingers softly tapped on the surface of the pendant. A slow beat, without a melody. Elira stood nearby. She said nothing, only stayed. As he had requested, don't go. Kael looked up at the sky. A full moon hung quietly among the gray clouds. A strange feeling rose in his chest, like a door trying to open inside his head. A memory, very distant, very blurred. The light of an oil lamp, a room, a woman singing, the same melody, the same song. Mother. That word burst from his lips, hoarse and small. Elira turned slightly to look. She said nothing, did not frighten him, just stood there. Kael gripped the necklace tighter. The memory in his head tried to become clearer, but as soon as that image began to appear, the familiar pain immediately flared up, as if restraining and tightening around his mind. Kael doubled over, a low roar escaping his throat. Elira immediately stepped forward. Kael. He raised his head, his golden eyes trembling from the rage trying to surge, just like every other time. But this time he still tried to speak. Blood. Elira froze slightly. Kael breathed heavily. The image in his head flashed. A dark room, blood on the stone floor, a figure standing at the door, a cold voice. The prince should not see this. The pain in Kael's head exploded violently. He roared. Claws burst out, his body trembling as the rage surged. Elira did not retreat. She immediately began to sing. Moon Song. The familiar, gentle melody drifted through the garden. Kael shivered. But this time, the rage did not completely swallow him, because that melody was holding him back. His fingers gripped the necklace tight. Don't, Kael said softly. Don't let me forget. Elira continued to sing. The wind blew through the garden, carrying the melody of the moon song high. On the stone balcony above, Aldric had captured everything within his sight. Every word, every reaction. Blood, don't let me forget. Aldric tightened his hand. For the past 3 years, Kael had never said anything. But now, he was trying to remember. Not just a memory, but a truth. A truth that had been buried. Aldric turned his head. Behind him, healer Theron was standing. He too had heard everything. Theron spoke softly. Alpha King. Aldric looked at him. Theron hesitated for a moment, then spoke. Moonsong does not only soothe the wolf. In legend, it can also awaken locked memories. Aldric frowned. What do you mean? Theron looked down at the garden, where Elira was still singing and Kael was gradually calming down. There are types of ancient curses, he said slowly, that do not kill. They only lock away a part of the mind. Aldric was silent. Theron continued. The prince was not just suffering from trauma after the death of the Luna. He looked at Aldric. Perhaps his memory has been locked. A chill ran down Aldric's spine. For the past 3 years, he had believed that Kael was only suffering from psychological and soul trauma. But if that was not the truth, it meant that someone had done this to his son. Aldric turned back to look at the garden once more. Elira was still singing. Kael was trying to slow his breathing. Aldric spoke softly. You think her song is breaking the curse? Theron nodded, possibly. At the same time, at the end of the corridor was still the figure tucked in the shadows. Vera. She had heard everything. Curse. Locked memory. Those words made the blood in her body turn cold. No, that could not happen. Her curse was perfect. No one could break it. No healer. No mage. No one. Unless... Vera turned her head to look down at the garden, her gaze stopping on Elira, the girl singing the moon song. A streak of coldness ran down Vera's spine. No. Moon singers had long been extinct. The Luna, mother of Prince Kael, was the last one. There could not be another. But if Elira truly was a moon singer, then that curse would not hold Kael much longer. Vera tightened her hand. In her head there was only one thought. If Kael's memory returned, then the night 3 years ago would no longer be a secret. Chapter 13. The Alpha's Decision. The following morning, Alpha King Aldric summoned Theron to his office. There were no guards, only the two of them. Theron spoke first. The prince is remembering. Aldric stood still. Slowly, but surely. Aldric looked down at the courtyard below. Kael was in the garden, and Elira stood nearby. She was not doing anything special, simply being present there. But the prince did not leave her side by even half a step. Aldric turned back. Theron, yes, Alpha. From now on, that girl will stay near the prince. Theron nodded. That will help him. Aldric continued. No one is allowed to hinder her. An order, short and clear. By noon, the news had spread throughout the palace. The Omega named Elira was permitted to stay near the prince. No one understood the reason. But no one objected. In the afternoon, as Aldric passed through the western corridor, he intended to go down to the garden, but a voice rang out from behind. Alpha King. Aldric stopped and turned his head. Vera stood at the end of the corridor, calm, controlled. She stepped forward. I heard you just changed the rules. Aldric looked at her. Correct. Vera stopped in front of him. Do you truly believe a wolfless Omega can heal the prince? Her voice was light, but the question was very sharp. Aldric answered immediately. I believe what I see. Vera tilted her head. You have lost a Luna. The prince is unstable. Are you placing your trust in a servant? Aldric stepped closer, his gaze turning cold. I place my trust in whatever makes my son calm. A moment of silence. Neither yielded. Finally, Vera smiled slightly, a very thin smile. I hope you are not mistaken. Aldric did not reply, only watched her. Vera bowed very slightly, then turned to leave. Once she was out of the corridor, her smile vanished. The prince had spoken. After 3 years, the moon song is breaking the curse. If the memories return, everything will end. Vera stopped walking. Her gaze turned toward the garden behind the palace. Where Elira was, her voice was very soft. Then, you will die before the prince remembers. Chapter 14. The night the curse cracked. That night, the northern wind blew hard through the garden behind the palace. The sky was dark. The moon was hidden by thick clouds. The garden was almost empty. Only 2 people were there, Kael and Elira. The prince sat on his familiar stone pedestal. The silver necklace was always gripped tightly in his hand. His fingers tapped a very soft beat. Elira stood nearby. She began to sing the moon song. The melody became clear and deeply familiar to Kael over the past few days. Kael closed his eyes. His breathing slowed. Inside his head, memories were trying to open. They continued to be detached, fragmented pieces of memory. The oil lamp, a room, a singing voice exactly like this melody. "Mother," Kael spoke softly. Elira did not stop singing. She knew he was trying to remember. On the balcony above, Alpha King Aldric was still standing, watching. He did not go down, only remained silent and observed. Theron was right. The moon song was breaking something in Kael's mind. Aldric tightened his hand. If it was a curse, then he hoped that tonight it would crack. But on the other side of the garden, a figure was approaching. Vera. Her dark Luna cloak covered most of her face. Her gaze was sharp and cold. She had no more patience. For 3 years she had tried to keep this secret. For 3 years the curse had locked the prince's memories. But now, the moon song was breaking everything. Vera stopped in the darkness. Her eyes locked onto Elira. "Moon singer," she said softly. "You should not exist." Her hand rose, and a thin, sharp blade appeared, black as the night. The blade carried ancient magic. With just one strike, everything would end. In the garden, Kael opened his eyes. Another memory flashed. The door, the scream, blood. He trembled. Blood. Elira stepped forward. "Kael, it is all right." She continued to sing, but at that exact moment, the wind shifted. Kael raised his head. He saw a movement. A figure lunged out of the shadows with a black blade, heading straight for Elira. "Stop!" Kael screamed. The sound echoed throughout the garden. For the 3rd time, he spoke. This time it was not a whisper but a scream. The rage exploded. Kael lunged forward. He blocked the path in front of Elira. Claws burst out, and Vera's blade slashed down. Kael roared. At the same time, another dark shadow fell from the balcony. It was Aldric. He landed in the middle of the garden like a storm. With just one movement, he pulled Elira into his arms. Vera's blade slashed through empty air. Aldric stood before her, his alpha eyes blazing. The wolf inside him exploded completely, an instinctive feeling washing over him, powerful and unmistakable. It was his mate. Aldric gripped Elira tightly in his arms. His voice was low and dangerous. "No one is allowed to touch my mate." The entire garden fell silent. Even the wind stopped for a moment. Elira's eyes widened. Mate. Alpha King Aldric had just spoken that word. Vera stood a few steps away, her eyes wide, not because of fear, but because of disbelief. No, that could not happen. Kael still stood before them. His body trembled because of the exploding rage. But this time it was not because of pain. It was because of memory. The moon song still rang in his head. The image of that night flared up, clearer, brighter. A room where the Luna knelt on a floor full of blood, a woman standing before her, silver hair, eyes cold and sharp. It was Vera. Kael let out a great roar, the memories shattering open. Kael raised his head. His golden eyes looked straight at the fake Luna. He said in a trembling but clear voice, "I remember." The entire garden was silent. Vera took a step back. Kael stepped forward. The rage in his eyes burned more powerfully than ever before. But this time, it was not an uncontrolled fury. It was a long-suppressed anger, fueled by the unsealed truth. Kael looked straight at her and said, "It was you." Chapter 15. The truth revealed. The palace is silent no more. The entire garden was as still as death. The wind stopped blowing. No one spoke. No one moved. Prince Kael stood in the middle of the stone courtyard. 3 years of silence had ended. Vera stepped back, her gaze wavering for just a second. Then she laughed. A cold laugh. "Prince, you are still not well. 3 years of silence have left your memory fragmented and confused." Kael looked with a steady gaze. He took another step. "That night, I saw." The wind blew again, dry leaves rolling across the stone floor. Kael gripped the silver necklace tightly. The memories in his head flared up, no longer blurred, but sharp as if happening right before him. A room, the light of an oil lamp, the Luna kneeling on a floor of blood, and a person standing before her. Kael said, "That person was you." His voice was low but sharp as a knife. "You were the one holding the blade." The entire garden was silent. The warriors in the distance looked at each other. No one dared to breathe hard. Vera laughed softly. "You are just a child. Children often imagine many things." But Kael shook his head. "No." He looked straight at her. You told me Mother was dead. But I saw—" His voice trembled once more. "You killed her." A strong gust of wind blew through the garden, Veyra's cloak fluttering slightly. She was silent. Then the smile vanished, her gaze becoming icy. "Yes," she said, just one word, but it was enough to make the entire garden freeze. Veyra stepped forward. No more hiding, no more pretending. "I killed her." Some warriors in the distance gasped. Veyra continued. "That weak Luna did not deserve this position, did not deserve to stand beside the Alpha King." Her gaze shifted to Aldric. "You need a strong Luna, not a weak moonsinger who only knows how to sing." Kael roared, the rage immediately flaring up, but Elira timely placed her hand on his shoulder and held him back. "Kael." He stopped, but his breath was still hurried. The moon song still echoed in his memory. In the back, Aldric stepped forward, slow, but every step was as heavy as thunder. Veyra looked at him. "Alpha King, you heard it. I did everything for the pack." Aldric did not answer immediately. He looked at her for a long time, then spoke. "You killed my Luna." His voice was not loud but cold. "And cursed my son." Veyra laughed. "I only locked his memory to keep him from ruining everything." A warrior stepped forward. "Alpha." Aldric raised his hand. The warrior immediately stopped. The Alpha King took another step. His gaze did not leave Veyra. "You do not deserve a quick death." He spoke in a deep and clear voice. "Seize her." The warriors lunged forward. Veyra tried to back away, but it was too late. Two warriors held her arms tightly. Veyra looked at Aldric, her eyes full of hatred. "Do you think it is over? That moonsinger will bring disaster to this pack." Aldric did not look at her for another second. "Take her away." The warriors dragged Veyra out of the garden. The sound of footsteps grew distant, then disappeared. Silence returned. Kael stood there, his breath still heavy, but his gaze was different. No longer blurred, no longer lost and dark. He looked at Elira for a long time, then said softly, "I remember." Elira smiled. Kael bowed his head. The silver necklace shimmered slightly under the moonlight. "Mother used to sing that song." Elira nodded. "I know." Kael looked at her. "Thank you." 2 words, small but containing all sincerity. Aldric stood behind them. He looked at Elira. Her scent was still there. The wolf in him still said one unmistakable thing. "Mate." Aldric stepped forward. Elira turned around. She bowed her head by instinct. "Alpha." Aldric looked at her, then said, "No need." Elira raised her head. Aldric placed his hand on her shoulder. A simple gesture, but clear. "You are not a servant," he continued. "You are my mate." The entire garden sank into silence once more. Elira's eyes widened. "But I—" Aldric shook his head. "I know who you are, Moonsinger." He looked at Kael. "And you saved my son." Kael stepped forward. He took Elira's hand. Not tight, but firm. "Don't go." This time he spoke more clearly. Elira smiled slightly. "I am not going anywhere." The northern wind blew through the garden. The trees shook gently. 3 years of silence had ended. A curse had been broken. And an ancient song had brought the prince back. Bonus chapter. Under the northern moonlight. 3 days after Veyra was captured, the truth about her spread throughout the northern pack. It was not a rumor. It was a confession. In the pack council's judgment room, Veyra finally told everything. 3 years ago, she had discovered a secret that Alpha King Aldric's Luna was not an ordinary Luna. She was a moonsinger. An ancient bloodline capable of soothing an alpha and influencing the entire pack. But to Veyra, that was not a miracle. It was a threat. Veyra was born into a warrior pack. In her world, power came from strength, not from gentle songs under the moonlight. She believed the northern pack needed a strong Luna, a Luna who knew how to fight, like her. So when Aldric chose the true Luna, Veyra decided it could not continue. That night, she entered the Luna's chambers with a knife. But everything was seen by Prince Kael, and she decided to seal his memories with an ancient curse. Veyra thought the curse had locked his memories forever. But in the end, she was wrong. A week later, the entire pack gathered before the palace's great courtyard. Warriors stood in long rows. Pack members gathered under ancient trees. On the highest stone step, Alpha King Aldric stood. To his right was Prince Kael, and to his left was Elira. Whispers rippled through the crowd. A wolfless Omega, a servant. Why is she standing there? Aldric raised his hand, and the courtyard immediately fell silent. He spoke in a deep and low voice. 3 years ago, our pack lost its Luna, and our prince lost his voice. A moment of silence. Then Aldric continued, "But the truth has finally been found." He looked at Elira. "This girl is not a servant. She is a moon singer." The crowd stirred. Some warriors looked at each other. They had heard the legends, but they had never seen it. Aldric continued, "She broke the prince's curse, saved my son." He placed his hand on Elira's shoulder. A simple gesture, but an affirmation. "And she is my mate." This time the commotion was louder, but no one objected, because at that moment, Kael took a step forward, looking down at the crowd. The prince took a breath, then spoke. "Pack." His voice was still hoarse but clear. Some in the crowd widened their eyes at the prince, speaking after 3 years. Kael looked around, then added, "I am fine, just 2 words." But the courtyard erupted, not with screams, not with cheers, just a gentle wave of relief. Kael turned to Elira. He spoke softly, "Don't go." Elira smiled and nodded in response. Late in the afternoon, the day's final sunlight draped over the garden behind the palace. The trees swayed gently in the wind. Prince Kael stood in the middle of the stone path, no longer sitting alone on the statue pedestal. He was holding a wooden sword. The movements were still clumsy, but his eyes were bright. Elira stood a few steps away. She was laughing. "Not like that." She said, "Your Highness must keep your balance." Kael tried again. The wooden sword swung. This time it was better. Elira nodded. "That is it." In the distance, Aldric stood leaning against an ancient tree. He folded his arms, watching quietly. A passing warrior stopped. Alpha King. Aldric nodded, but his gaze remained on the garden. Kael had just hit the target. He turned to Elira with a small smile. Elira clapped. "Progress." Kael looked toward Aldric. "Father," he called, his voice still slightly hoarse but clear. Aldric stepped forward, picking up a second wooden sword and handing it to Kael. "Try again." Kael nodded. The two stood opposite each other. The wooden swords touched, lightly, then faster. Elira took a step back to watch. The wind blew through the garden, carrying Kael's small laugh. Aldric stopped, looking at Elira. "Stay," he said. "Not a command, just an affirmation." Elira nodded softly. "I am still here." In front of them, Kael swung the sword again. This time faster, stronger. The final sunlight of the day fell upon the garden. 3 shadows stretched long across the stone path, and for the first time in many years, the palace of the Northern Pack was no longer silent.